go?
Yep, I'm recording right now.
All right. Welcome everyone to a wonderful Winter Wonderland Snowmageddon version of our training webinars for the local system administrator training. I am going to go ahead and go through these at a normal pace, and there will be points where I will stop and we will look to see if there are any chat questions that are related to the screens that we just covered, and then we'll answer some of those questions periodically. I'm not going to stop the presentation until we hit those stopping points, and then we can discuss them and go back. And the reason that the PowerPoints were not sent out previously, prior to the presentation, is that the last time we held these, there was an issue where we had some people who really should have been paying attention, were rushing ahead and quote unquote completed the training at their own pace and logged out and proceeded to continue to email me with basic questions and things that we covered during the course of the training for the next several months, that they would have learned if they'd actually participated in the training the way it was designed. So this time we're not going to send those out ahead of time. We are going to send them out afterwards along with the supporting documentation. If you would like to take notes, please take notes as we go. But like I said, the way this is designed is that we are going to have the question and answer sections, and we want you to put those questions into the chat. I saw there were a couple notifications here real quick. I'm going to take a quick look at what's in the chat.
Oh, that's just me, Chris, putting those documents in the chat for everyone.
Those are the additional documents that we will be discussing during different parts here. They're PDFs that I have made over the years that help and assist with the 4 basic searches, the list of the IWDS user roles and what those roles do when you're creating a new user ID, and then the rapid response map. That's the most current one that I have, breaking down who's where in the rapid response maps, and those will be important as we go along. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Chris Tylen. I work for the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in the employment and training area. I am the system administrator for the IWDS system, and I welcome you today to the first of 3 local system administrator trainings. There will be 2 today and 1 tomorrow. And right now we're going to be discussing editing IWDS client screens. Some acronyms that will be used in this presentation and get used quite often in emails from us and daily conversations. DCEO stands for Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. OET is the Office of Employment and Training. IWDS is the Illinois Workforce Development System. Some people call it IWDS, some people call it IWDS. It's just a personal preference thing. We all know what we're talking about. IWNC, Illinois Work Net Center. And the lowercase w is apparently fairly important to people. I had to correct that a couple of years ago, and I had to get used to the idea of the lowercase w and the uppercase N when putting WorkNet in anything in these slides. And then LSA, Local System Administrator. That's just the short abbreviation for saying that it's the supervisor level in the LWIA. The overview. This training is not meant to be a substitute for the wonderful WIOA training series that are offered by my partner at OET, Jim Potts. Jim does the eligibility and the basic client screens and career planner trainings, and this is not meant to replace any of that. This is focusing and concentrated on what an IWDS local system administrator can do to change or edit client screens after the client has been certified by the career planner, and how to submit to OET for client modifications that you're not able to do yourself, that you'll need assistance from OET. Please be aware that just because something can be changed doesn't mean that it should be changed. This is something especially when you're dealing with anything affecting eligibility. The local system administrator needs to always be aware of how certain changes to a client record can affect client eligibility before they make any alterations or submit for modifications. The edit could be changing an item that might be the only thing that made the client eligible for things like basic skills deficient or low income, or for a particular title like 1D that already have services entered in IWDS. So before you change something, just make sure that that's not the only thing that's making them eligible for that particular certification, because if you get rid of it, the system's still going to have those services in there. It's not going to automatically get rid of them for you, and it's not going to stop you from putting additional services in, even though they technically are no longer eligible for it, because you already certified it before. So it doesn't remove the certification when you remove the supporting documentation. It's just something that you'll get tagged on if they catch it during a monitoring or an audit. So IWDS has two distinct levels of client data entry, and this is something that is important for the supervisors to understand and be able to explain to your career planners when necessary. The customer level is the top level, and there's only one. So it is the most up-to-date information. Everything on that is going to be where if there is a new application put in, it overwrites the information on the customer menu that was there from the most previous update, whether it was an application or a career plan. So there's only one customer level record per client, and then you can have multiple application levels below. The IWDS user can manually update the customer level data at any time. So your career planner or you, the local system administrator, can go into this customer level menu at any point in time and update it, and it does not change the information on the application. Now, if a new application gets entered, like I said, the most recent information overwrites onto this level. And this is important because the customer level is where you record any changes in the customer record that happen after certification. So if the person comes in and they get married, they get divorced, they have a legal name change, they get a new phone number, a new email address, they get a new job, any changes that occur after the application record was certified, you record here. You don't change it on the application, you change it at the customer level. The only exception to this snapshot in time rule, which is what we refer to with the application, when an application level record is certified, it's like a snapshot in time. Everything's frozen there, which is why you make the other changes, any updates, any history that happens afterwards at the customer level. The only exception is selective service. If your client is a male who's under 18 at the time of certification, and then during the course of time registers with selective service after your certification date, the selective service number has to be added at the application level, which will then update the customer level automatically in the veterans information or the private information area. You will need to contact the IWDS system administrators, and that is Jim Potts or me, Chris Tylen, in order to have the selective service updated. So this is not one of the things that you would be able to do yourself or that the career planners can do. It will require an IWDS modification, either an email to us or an actual form filled out. Now, the second level of IWDS clients is the application level, and this is where all the client services get recorded. A client can have multiple application level records. The client could be co-enrolled, or they may have pre-existing incurrent or exeter records. So, for example, this client off here to the right, Ruth Aaron, she's coming in right now as a WIOA incurrent in 2025. But in her history, she had a application from 5/1 of 2020 that she completed as an exeter. She came in as Ruth Mays, a previous name, in 2019, and it stayed at incurrent level and never went anywhere. She came in as Ruth Mays in 2011 and completed the program as an exeter. And all the way back in 2015, she came in as Ruth Musial and had an applicant level record where she actually came in, did everything, you guys certified her, but she never actually took services. So you can have a history that looks like this. I've actually seen some that go back all the way to the JTEP in 1997. I've actually seen a client where the woman had at least 7 different legal names over 12, I think it was, different applications from 1997 through 2022. So they can add up. And the thing is this is why we always try to make sure that when you're looking for a client that you're adding additional records to the existing clients instead of trying to create a new one. So each application level record is a snapshot in time. I use that quote a lot, and that's something that I find that people understand and that your career planners will understand. So each application, at the time of the date of certification, that information in that record is to be correct at that time. So like we said earlier, if the client gets married, moves, had any other changes after the application date, then you would go into the customer level to update that information. You would not do it in the application. Once it's certified, once you are at this applicant level or to the registrant level because you've entered a service, you will not be changing any of that information on that record. You will go to the customer level. And a lot of times you're going to have those career planners come to you saying, oh, they moved, I've got a new address, I got a new email, and you're like, no. You need to go to the customer level to enter that information. Now, once again, you may notice that this client has different last names through those different 5 applications. This is extremely common in IWDS, especially for, but not limited to, female clients. In this case, it was very likely she was single, married, divorced, then married again. I've actually had a client who had his name legally changed to his stage name, which was a rapper, and apparently he called himself Shiny Nickel, and that became his new legal name. But when he was in IWDS 5 years earlier, it was under his real name, which I don't remember what it was. We'll just say John Doe. And he'd actually been served before, but he was coming in for services as Shiny Nickel. And we ended up having to do a full search on the SSN behind the scenes with the programmers to finally find him. So it's not limited to women, but I'd say 99% of legal name changes are going to be female clients. Now, here's a question for you guys to kind of look at and think about. So if Ruth Aaron legally changes her name back to Ruth Mays due to a life event, she had a divorce in 2023, while she was still enrolled as a registrant in this row here, the one with the application date of 2020, at that time, what would need to happen in IWDS? Would you just change the name on the current application? Would you change the name on all of the applications? Would you change the name on the customer level, or would you do nothing? And the answer is that you would change the name on the customer level. And to do that, they would go into contact information, and then they would change it there. and that would change the name of the client on the upper level and not on the application level. Now, I am going to answer the question here from Joel. He asked about adding selective service after the application date. What if they turn 18 after exit and are in follow-up? Do we still need it updated by the sysadmin? The answer is that to stay safe, to be as proper as we can be about it, my answer is going to be that if they are receiving services, including the selective service or including follow-up services, I would turn around and have the selective service added as long as they are receiving any kind of services, whether it's prior to follow-up or in follow-up. I would still do it. And I've got something here from Jim Potts, who's sitting in with us today. And he wants a clarification about updating selective service information on the individual. So, for example, an individual who's born male enters WIOA prior to turning 18. Now the client's been receiving youth services and turned 18 and has registered for selective service. So the private information screen needs updated. I'm saying that the local system administrators would need to contact either Jim Potts or I, the system administrators, to have the selective service on the private information screen updated. I believe it is a locked field after certification that does not let even the local system administrator role enter it, but the super user roles that Jim and I have would let us enter it for you. And this is one that, unless you've been contacted as part of a monitoring or an audit, you can request that via email without. Oh, Paul says that it's not locked anymore. That's an update. I will have to double check that, because as of last year when I did the slides, it was a locked field. So apparently that has changed. So that's awesome. You guys can enter them yourselves, but if you do have trouble with it, make sure that you contact us. We are finding that as we are going through, there are some changes being made to IWDS that sometimes we're not always aware of, and I don't think our own programmers are sure. Sometimes we've had some things happen. So Jim says that a selective service opens up for a career planner within 30 days of their birthday. So that's awesome. That's new information for me, and I appreciate it, everyone. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. Sometimes when a client comes into an LWIA, the career planner may forget to search for an existing IWDS record for the client, or they might not be able to find the existing record due to a name change or a spelling error. Another thing that's extremely common is sometimes the first and last names will get flipped. So the career planner ends up creating a duplicate IWDS client record. Usually what happens in this case is that the career planner is going to get an error on the SSN field when they try to save the new record. If this happens, then the local system administrator should instruct the career planner to first try these 4 simple searches. These 4 simple searches, which are on one of the PDFs that Kirsten shared with you guys through the chat, will find 99.9% of existing IWDS clients. The 4 searches will take approximately 2 minutes for a career planner to complete, and they can be done at either the customer level or the application level searches. And in this case, we're using sample client Justina Thompson for the examples. And there's the client's information off here to the right. It's a completely fictional person that I made up for these trainings. So the first of these 4 searches is a partial last name with the last 4 SSN. And the reason we recommend partial last names, or partial names in general, is that the search function looks for whatever it is that you type in. So if the client's last name is Mark, M-A-R-K, but you search for Mark, M-A-R-C, you're not going to get any results for M-A-R-K. But a search for M-A-R will return Mark with a K, Mark with a C, Marcus with a K, Marcus with a C, Marchand, Marcel, etc. So it will take, as long as those, whatever you type in matches, and then anything else can come after it and it's not a problem. So in this case, the first search, I'm typing in T-H-O-M-P for a shortened version of Thompson with no first name and with the social. Then if the results are too much on that first way of doing things with the partial last name and the social security number, then I instruct people to try a partial first name with partial last name and the social security number. So in this case, we're adding the first three letters of her first name, J-U-S, to those other last name and social to try to narrow the results down a little bit better. Then if you're still not finding what you're looking for, these last two are pretty powerful. The first one is last four and birth date. So there's no name whatsoever. So even if they got the names flipped, even if the name's misspelled, even if the name is completely wrong, they put the wrong client on it by accident. By looking for the social and the birth date, it's ignoring name completely. Then the other one is especially, the last one is especially important if your client is female, because they are much more likely to have a legal name change of the last names through marriage or divorce. You can search for just a partial first name with the last four SSN, because you can have one client with multiple applications with different last names, as we saw earlier. But between the four, you're going to find 99% of existing clients in IWDS. And if you can't find them, then obviously contact your system administrators, Jim Potts or Chris Tylen, and we'll assist. Now, moving on. If you are searching for IWDS client records and you discover that your client is in IWDS already, but multiple times, and you are positive that they're the same person, you have two choices. We can delete the bad records, or we can request to merge the records into the correct one. And the decision for whether you're going to delete or merge is pretty simple. If the bad record has case notes or universal services, then OET recommends that you request to merge. If there are no case notes or services in the bad record, it's just a client level record, it's got a name, it could have a social or not, it's got address, but it's got no applications, it's got no universal services, and it's got no case notes, then I would say that you should request to delete that one, because it has no pertinent information that's worth keeping and merging into the correct record. Now, to request to merge or delete a client record, the local system administrator will need to send an email to the IWDS system administrators, Chris Tylen or Jim Potts, or both of us, with a screenshot of the customer records, like the example on the right, and you detail which record has the customer level information you want to keep when you merge into, or which record you want just deleted from IWDS. I think my personal record for the most client level customer records is 27. There were 27 of a particular client in an LWIA where the person was repeatedly coming back into the resource room and getting doing things, getting services, resume help, job applications, etc. But they weren't getting in. There was only one of the 27 records had any applications under it. The other 26 were all universal services, maybe an occasional case note here or there. But we had to merge all 27 into one record because all of them had some data in it that was worth keeping, but it was all spread out because the person every time he came in, he made a new resource room record. So this is where we're taking our first section here where we say, are there any questions about the merging and deleting or the searching for the client? And if there are any, just put it into the text chat. And if not, we will move on here momentarily. Chat. As Jim Potts pointed out, the partial name is very important in case the client is in the system with a typo on the customer level record. Absolutely. That's one of the, if there's a misspelling, if there's if they accidentally put a hyphen in, or if they accidentally put a space, could be a simple typo. The partial really does make a big difference on the searching, and it's one of those things that I would definitely stress to your career planners when they come on board, or if you've got someone who's having trouble finding someone. All right, with that, do we prefer duplicate entries and separate emails or batch together? I prefer to keep emails in general when you guys are emailing things in for corrections. And unless there is a reason to put things into a batch, I prefer a separate email for each client so it's easier to track. So like if you have 3 clients that you're wanting to turn in for either having records deleted or records merged, I would prefer to have a separate email for each client with the list of, and in each email under each client, you could have your 5 duplicate records and you want this one deleted and these other 3 merged into the 4th one. You know, I find that it's cleaner and it's easier to track what we're doing if you limit each email per client. All right. We are going to move on to the next screen. Okay, now we're going to start talking about making corrections to IWDS clients that have already been certified. This is one of the things that's a key part here, because if the client has not been certified, then the local system administrator powers aren't needed. So there are 4 different stages of an application level record. The first stage is inquiry. That's where the application is started but not certified. Second one is applicant. That's where the application is certified but services have not been entered yet. Registrant. Application is certified and there's at least 1 service entered. And then there's exiter, where the application has been certified, client services are all closed, and the exit screen is completed. Now, our client can be in follow-up while in exiter status and have some active services under follow-up, but we're talking about the main services are all closed. And let's see. If the application is still in the inquirent status, the career planner should be able to edit all the client fields in the record, since none of the fields should be locked at this point. So if they are still in inquirent, they haven't registered the client, then there's no reason for them to come to you to ask for things to get corrected, because all the fields should still be open because it has not been certified. If the application is in applicant or registrant status, then the local system administrator and or the career planner will be limited to only edit the unlocked fields. Local system administrator will be able to edit more fields than an IWDS user that only has case manager, supervisor, or career planner roles. Any locked fields are going to require an IWDS modification request form, technically, especially if you're being monitored or if it's a major change to a client, then we want the forms filled out just for the paperwork trail. In a lot of cases, if you find something that needs done and you found it on your own, simply sending an email to the system administrators, Jim Potts or Chris Tylen, this is what our job is. We help you make corrections and fix things as we go along. But for terms of the presentation, I'm going to state that an IWDS modification request form is required. If it's a major change, social security number, things along those lines, you probably want to go ahead and have the form filled out. And but it's not, if it's something you found on your own and it's something that we can change pretty quickly, generally we're not going to make you go back and fill it out all over again if it's something simple. The local system administrator is able to edit fields, delete services, and even delete eligibility certifications on an application. So these are things that you can do yourself with the local system administrator role. For the course of the rest of these slides, when we're talking about these IWDS client screens, I'm using Ruth Aaron, who is a fictional person that I created for test purposes, as the test client. On the application definition screen, the local system administrator is able to change the Illinois WorkNet Center choice and the assigned career planner with these options in the drop downs. The only choices available with these two that are going to be available in these drop downs are going to be specific to the LWIA where the client's assigned. So if the client, like in this case, is saying that's LWIA 15, that's a LWIA that I use in my test. You're not going to find a drop down for a WorkNet Center choice in LWIA 26 if your person is assigned LWIA 15. You're only going to find things associated with the LWIA that is associated with the client, in this case 15. Same with the career planner list. You're not going to have a career planner on that list that doesn't have an IWDS user ID that's assigned to that LWIA. If you try to change the contact date, the IWDS system will not allow the new date to be greater than the application date. So, for example, if you find out that the contact date is different than what they put in and you need to change it, if your contact date for the if your application date is 11/4, it's not going to allow you to change the contact date to 11/5. That'd be something that you're going to need to work with the system administrators. We'll probably have to back out all the services. You'll probably have to back out the certification. You change the contact date. They recertify with the new date because it's going to be greater than the date that it was before, and then they have to re-enter all the services. If the client is not showing up in the Career Planner's My Customer menu in IWDS, the first thing you're going to want to look at is to make sure that the Show on My Applications field says yes. This is something that occasionally can be done by accident by a career planner, where they mark it to say no, and then that client doesn't show up in the quick drop downs for my customers, my registrants, my exiters, etc. So that's a quick fix right there if the client's not showing up and the career planner name is correct and it's the right career planner. But if it says no on show on my applications, it's not going to show up on those quick menus. From the application definition screen, the local system administrator has the ability to delete the entire application by clicking the delete button. Got to caution you. This is going to delete almost everything connected to the application. It's going to delete all the services. It's going to delete the certification. It's going to delete all the client data that you guys entered in on the various screens. It's going to delete any test data that you guys put in on the test score screen. All of that's going to be deleted when you delete the application. However, it's not going to delete case notes. It's not going to delete universal services, and it's not going to delete the customer level client information. So the client information is still going to be there under the customer level records, but you're completely nuking that application from IWDS. Moving on to the next screen. The next screen is the concurrent program screen, and the local system administrator is able to change all of the choices. Now, the one thing that we need to caution you guys on here is that this screen should reflect all concurrent programs for the client on the application date, not programs added after that date. So in this case, if the person turned around and ended up going in and getting TANF assistance after this date, let's say they went in on January 2nd of 2025 and got added to TANF, you're not going to go in and change this, because as of the date of the application on 12/2 of 24, they were not in TANF, and that's what this needs to reflect. It is a snapshot in time. During participation in WIO, if the client does get involved with any of the other programs that originally had a response of no, you are able to case note what happened, and then you can change it. You're not going to just go in and change it and leave it. You can do it once you make a case note. So for example, the client first entered the WIO program, and like we were talking about with TANF, they weren't in it, but later the client went on TANF. It would be correct to go ahead and update this, but only after you have made a case note explaining the change. However, you should never switch your response on the concurrent programs list from yes to no during participation. The only exception to this would be that if there was a data entry error at the time of application and the yes was incorrectly recorded, then you would change to no, and you would also add a case note explaining why this change was made. Sorry about that. I changed one of the slides on this when I was doing the update, and apparently I need to make a note that this screen needs a little bit more information than what I had. So I apologize for the confusion on that presentation. I will fix it for next time. However, the point of the change is that if you are going to change something, whether you're changing it from a no to a yes or a yes to a no, is that there has to be a case note in there explaining the change. You can't just change it and not put any reason behind it. And I apologize, I am in the front room where my son's two birds are, which are normally quiet, but occasionally will shriek when the cat gets a little too close, and that is what just happened. So I apologize for the noise, and we are going to move on. Moving on to the characteristics and barrier screen. The local system administrator is not able to change any of the fields on here after certification. So any changes to this are going to require the IWDS modification request form or contact with the local system administrator or the system admins at IWDS. So for example, if somebody were to screw up and they accidentally pick the wrong language of preference, or if they make the person English language learner and they're not, those are changes that do need to be corrected, but you're going to have to ask for assistance in order to get those done. On the employment characteristics screen, the local system administrator can only change the tenure and the dependent of a seasonal or migrant and seasonal farm worker fields. Changes to any other field on the screen will require an IWDS modification request form. And I am going to take just a second here. I'm going to put you guys on mute, and I'm going to move the bird out of this room. Okay, I apologize for that. Like I said, normally the birds are, and here we go again. Give me another second. Wife and kids are both home with snow days, so I've got them getting the birds out of here. So I apologize for that. Hopefully it wasn't too shrill. All right. On the employment going back one, Jim Potts wanted to point out that do not change tenure if it's used for eligibility. It's part of criteria under unlikely to return to previous industry or occupation. So right here, the tenure under employment characteristics, local system administrator is only able to change tenure independent of a seasonal or migrant or farm worker, and you don't want to change the tenure if it's affecting eligibility. Okay. Once again, we talked about the Pell Grant being the only one that you can change without a request here. And now we're going on to the test screens. Local system administrator is not able to make any changes to existing tests that have already been entered. Local system administrator and the career planner are both able to add new tests to the application, but you're not able to make corrections to the old ones or delete any of them yourselves. If you click view on a test, you can go into the maintain test screen, which shows the detailed information for the selected test. So from here, you can see all these screens are locked and that the local system administrator is not able to make changes to the test record. However, in some cases, it may be easier to have your career planner go ahead and enter the correction, the corrected thing, and just have us delete the bad test. Or it could be easier for you to request to have the information changed. It's all dependent on which one you're more comfortable doing. We're happy to either delete the bad test or make corrections to the one that needs updated. Be aware, however, when you're making changes to the test dates or the test scores, that it can affect eligibility for basic skills deficient. One of the big ones is you have to watch your test dates. Make sure the test dates are prior to the application date. If you're changing it, then you could end up having a problem. And Jim just pointed out that for monitoring and data validation, you need to make sure that there's a hard copy of the test scoring sheet supporting the information in the hard copy file. And that's something that goes in under your basic data validation and your eligibility stuff. Your career planner should know to do that. But for our purposes on making updates to the clients, you want to make sure that this information reflects the documentation. And if we are having an issue with the test date needing changed, or the scores, or even the type of test that was entered, we're going to want to make sure that we're not affecting eligibility when we make those changes. I'm going to go ahead and answer this question because it is relevant to the test screens that we're on right now. It was asked, do you have to submit a formal request for items that don't affect eligibility when it's locked? Like if a CASAS test score is off and doesn't affect eligibility, or the basic skills deficient by education level shows deficiency and the basic screening school shows. Basically what we're talking about when you're having to when you have to fill out the change request form, it's guaranteed that if it's close to a monitoring event or during a monitoring event, you have to fill out the form. In a lot of cases, we do turn around and get requests to make changes to these all the time via email. If it's something you caught yourself, we're not too sticky about making sure that the request form is there unless it's a major change or going to cause multiple problems. In that case, we may ask you to go ahead and fill out the request and submit it back in with the request form. But once again, this kind of goes back to when the person is entering the information, the way you should be training them to do it is that they should be looking at the hard copy scoring sheet and entering the information directly from it, not from notes, not from memory. They should be looking at their documentation when they're doing it. But if it's requiring a correction, then obviously you have to contact us. But the forms, as we mentioned earlier, during monitoring event, close to a monitoring event, definitely have to do the form. Moving on from tests, we're going to the public assistance screen. The local system administrator is only able to change the most recent date referred to other federal or state assistance. Changes to all the rest of these fields are going to require either the IWDS modification request form or system administrator help from either Jim Potts or Chris Tylen. If they mark the person as being on food stamp and they're not, if they mark the person as being SSDI and they're not, or if they forgot to put the person on TANF and they should have been, these are all things that can affect eligibility. So any changes to this screen are going to be important because it might turn around and either cancel out the eligibility that was used to make them low income, or it may turn around and actually make them eligible for low income when you didn't already have them certified that way. On the family characteristics and list family screen, the local system administrator is not able to make any changes. So if there's changes to this screen Whether you're adding or removing family members, or if you need to change the age of a family member, or whether they're a dependent or not, all of those things are something that the local system administrators are not able to do themselves. You're going to need to get assistance to make those changes. Maintain family screen. The local system administrator is not able to change any of the fields. Any changes here, like we said, updating or removing family members is going to require the request form or assistance. Moving on to income calculation, local system administrator is not able to change any of the fields here after certification. Any changes here should require the actual IWDS modification request form. This is something where, because it's detailed and we're talking about things that are going to affect the low income eligibility of the client every time, there's a potential that a change to any of these income calculation fields could make a change to the eligibility. This is one where if you're changing something on the income calculation screen, I recommend doing a IWDS modification request form every time. On the dislocated worker characteristics screen, the local system administrator is only able to change displaced homemaker field, and only from no to yes. If it's already answered yes, it's going to be locked. And then you're also able to change the DWG disaster fields. Changes to any other field on this screen requires an IWDS modification request form or assistance from the system administrators. The WIOA training criteria screen, the local system administrator is only able to change who the assessment is completed by or who the IEP is completed by. Any other changes here are going to require assistance. And I'm going to answer this question here real quick. The IWDS modification request form is only needed when the client's a registrant. No. If the client is a registrant or an exiter. Once it's certified, so technically it could also be an applicant, but chances are most of the time they don't stay an applicant very long. They end up being a registrant. So that's going to be a very small percentage of the time that you're going to have an applicant. But registrants and exiters both should be, if it's requiring a form, it doesn't matter whether they're a registrant or an exiter, you'll still need to do the form. Now, on the eligibility determination screen, the local system administrator, you can add a new title or program eligibility and certify it. I believe the career planner can also turn around and add additional certifications, but this is the area where if after, say, something is changed or they may, by changing the incorrect item that might allow them to be 1A low income or the 1A basic skills deficient, you're able to go in and add additional certifications. So you enter an eligibility determination date that is on or after the application date. And if there are any other title or programs that the client is eligible for already, with the client information that's already saved in IWDS under that application record, they will appear as additional choices to be certified. In this case, this client is also eligible for dislocated worker career and training services that were not previously certified. If you click on the certification date on a particular title or program that is already certified, the local system administrator has the ability to delete the previously completed certification by clicking the delete button. However, the local system administrator should be very careful to make sure that any and all related services are deleted prior to deleting the certification. So for example, if in this case you're wanting to get rid of the 1A and just serve the person in 1D, any services that were entered under 1A need to be deleted before you delete these certifications. When removing career and training certifications in the same title, make sure you remove the training certification first. Because in order to be eligible for a training, you have to have the career. So if you accidentally delete the career one first, it can mess up the system. Now, taking a look at the documentation on a title or program certification, you're going to see the eligibility documentation screen. The local system administrator is able to change any and all of the selected documentation drop-downs for an eligibility criteria if needed. However, it is strongly recommended by OET that if you are going in and changing any of these documentation, that you add a case note in IWDS detailing the change and why you were doing it. On the contact information screen, the local system administrator is not able to change any of the fields. Changes to this screen require an IWDS modification request form. This is a case where I would honestly say that you should do the form, because we're talking about changing the basic information of person's name, their address, what county they're in, their phone, their cell. And if this is a thing that needs to be changed because it was not entered correctly on the application date, we need to make sure that it's documented, that we have the IWDS modification form, we're making a case note, this was entered incorrectly, it was a typo, etc., whatever. Any changes that happen after the application date shouldn't be made here. These are changes that, as we discussed earlier, should go on the customer level, and they are changes that happen after the quote-unquote snapshot in time. The additional contact screen. The local system administrator is able to add new contacts and change any fields on an existing contact. So for example, if you find that, as in this case, the contact of Albert Griffey, who is a friend of Ruth Aaron, all they put was the phone number. Well, if you find out afterwards that you've got a street address, you've got an email address, you've got some comments you want to add, the local system administrator is able to go in and make those changes. Now, if something happens where you're adding a new contact that's after the date, so it's not one that was on the application, you're adding a new one afterwards, there's an additional contact screen on the customer level for that, as we talked about with the snapshot in time. Or if this guy's information changes, his phone number changes, you're not going to want to change it here on the application level because it was correct on 12/2, but on today 1/6 you find out that his phone number changed. That needs to go on the customer level. On the private information screen, the local system administrator is able to change the race and ethnicity, whether or not the person is an individual with a disability, what the category of that disability is, and all of the new WIOA fields at the bottom. Changes to the other fields on the screen are going to require an IWDS modification request form. And once again, these are critical things such as social security number, the gender at birth, the birth date. So I would strongly recommend doing the change request form. And definitely these things affect eligibility. So if the disability is something that was used for the eligibility, then it's not something you're just gonna change. You want to double check with the system administrators, make sure it's not going to alter the eligibility, and we may need to put in a case note. Like for example, if You clicked vision related, but the thing was really truly a hearing related disability. I would definitely contact the system administrators, talk with either me or Jim or both, and either we will help you make the change or we'll instruct you how to do it without affecting the eligibility. Now, if it turns out to be something that's going to change things that remove an eligibility, then we'll talk you through that as well. And this particular line here, the individual with the disability, Jim is pointing out that it's a youth barrier. Changing it from a yes to a no can make a substantial difference on the eligibility of a youth client. So I wouldn't be making any changes to these without checking with the system administrators before doing it. Veterans information. The local system administrator is not able to change any fields hang on. We'll go back to that in just a little bit. I'm going to pick this up right here. The Veterans Information Screen, the local system administrator is not able to change any fields about the service information. However, you're able to change the new WIOA fields down at the bottom. Changes to any of the fields on this screen would require an IWDS modification request form because this could affect eligibility. It could also affect different things related to the veterans programs. So we want to make sure that if we're making changes that you are verifying that the things were accurate on the date of service, the application date, and if any changes occurred after the application date, those changes go on the customer level. But if it's something that actually needs to be changed because it was wrong on the application date, then we're going to change it here. And down here at the bottom, the Veterans Information Screen, these new WIOA fields, the DVOP Specialist, Veterans Affairs, date referred to Veterans Affairs, date referred to Veterans State Grants. Those are things that you can change without having assistance, but you want to make sure, as I said, that these changes are reflecting what was happening on the day of the snapshot in time. So the snapshot in time is 12/2. So if this information changes as of, say, January 6th today, something changed, then that change needs to be recorded on the customer level, not the application level, even though you can, because this needs to be a snapshot in time. Now this is one that we are going to stress. Oh, that's new information for me. Apparently those new WIOA fields, according to Jim, who does more work with the eligibility stuff and the career planners, he said those fields are actually open to allow updating during participation. So you can make those changes. I will make a note to update that for my next presentation. I have never had to deal with that part of the eligibility, so I appreciate that information and I will get it corrected. Quick note here. Okay, that's interesting. I did not know that before. So it's for reporting purposes, not eligibility related. So that's new information for me and I appreciate it. Okay, now we're going to talk about one particular field that career planners don't seem to understand sometimes. And I run a weekly report looking for these. And Chris, we will talk about that in a second as soon as I get done talking about the priority of service. The veterans information screen, did the customer receive priority of service? So for those that don't know what this is, veterans priority of service means that a veteran client is to go to the top of the list for service in an LWIA. They should not have to wait, quote unquote, in line. That does not mean that if you have a client that you're working on right now, that you stop working on them to focus on to go to the veteran. It just means that they should be next in line. They should go to the top of the list. So the question, did the customer receive priority of service, should only be answered no if you denied the client priority of service. You did not make them next on the list. You did not put them to the top of the list. Meaning the career planner deliberately chose to wait on a different client, a different new client, not finish the one they're on, but a different new client, and they made the veteran wait for service. If there was nobody else in line, and this was just the next client, period, that does not mean that they were not given priority. It means simply that they received service the way they should have. They were next. The only time this should be marked no is if the client was specifically denied the priority of service. Now, this is new information for me that I didn't know, but Jim is a veteran, if you didn't know. And priority of service should not be given if the client received a dishonorable discharge. I did not know about that, but it makes sense. No priority of service if dishonorable discharge. And I'm going to go back a screen to here, and the question came from one of you that if a veteran had a dishonorable discharge, should the DD-214 be listed in IWDS? And the answer is that if the individual tells you they had a dishonorable discharge and they provide the DD-214, it is correct to record it, but no priority of service would be given to the person due to the dishonorable discharge. Okay. If they do not choose to provide the DD-214, do you still serve the individual and then list veteran as no? Jim is responding that often individuals who have a dishonorable discharge don't bring it up. Jim, I don't know that if they don't bring it up and they're given priority of service, I don't know that it's a problem. I think that the big deal here is that we want to make sure that people who are considered veterans are not denied the priority of service. We're not that cases of the dishonorable discharge, if they fail to disclose it or choose not to disclose it, I don't think that you're not going to get punished for giving them priority of service. It's more that we're looking for situations where a person was supposed to receive it and was denied it. Okay, the next screens we're going to talk about are the work history screens. On the list work history screen, neither the career planner nor the local system administrator is able to add any new records to the work history screen after certification. If you need to add a job where the client was employed on or prior to the application date, you're going to need to submit an IWDS modification request form. Any new job that the client starts after the application date should be entered on the customer level by the career planner. However, the local system administrator is able to change any existing employer records and making changes in that record by clicking on them. So we're going to turn around and click into the Hobby Lobby one. So the local system administrator has the ability to change any of the fields in here, and they can even completely remove the employer by clicking the delete button at the bottom. However, the local system administrator needs to verify that any changes to the screen were accurate as of the application date. Now, in this case, this job was from 12/1/2018 to 3/20 of 2020. So if anything in here is changing and those dates of employment stay the same, you'd be able to change that because it would have been correct as of 12/2 of 24. Now, if something happens where they come back or you find out they were still working there on the application date, then that's going to require the change request form. If they got rehired there after the application date, you enter that as a new job under the customer level. So changes that occur after this date, career planner is able to do it themselves on the customer level. Nothing you need to change. The exception to this, and where you need to be careful, is that if these are jobs associated with the dislocated worker eligibility, the dislocation equals yes, the layoff reason, date of layoff, all this information here. If it turns out that this is the trade petition job with the trade petition number and the death ID, these are all things that are going to affect eligibility and whether or not a person is actually eligible for the services they're receiving. So if you've got the dislocation job and you're having to make changes to the record, I would contact the system administrators and we'll look it over with you and we'll help you determine whether these are changes that you can make without needing assistance. And Jim is pointing out that from an eligibility standpoint, in a WIOA application, the only job that should be recorded would be the dislocation job. No job should be recorded on the youth or the adult application. You're going to have some situations, though, where some of these jobs pull over across from IDES automatically once you create an IWDS record. If it turns out that when those come across, they're usually in all caps. And if there's something wrong there, then you probably need to be looking at the IDES records. And if there's a correction that needs to be made, you'll probably we'll need to make sure that they're going through and getting those things corrected with IDES, and any changes you make here aren't going to stay. But his point stands is that for eligibility purposes, the only job that would be recorded are going to be the dislocation jobs for 1D, 1E clients. As for the multiple jobs being pulled over from IDES, should the system administrator go in and delete some of them, meaning jobs that could be 10 years ago? The problem is that if you go in and delete them, they may come back across again. I would say that if they're coming over from IDES, I would just leave it. It's something that we've got a data transfer that's coming across, and as long as it's not hurting the record, I would just leave it alone, because even if you delete it, it may come back again. And if the customer is ready to exit and still working the same job they held before the application, can we add the job in at exit time? Yes, that's something with the exit portion of this. That's not really related to editing client records. That would be something more under what Paula Berry and the performance unit handle with exiting. But you would do the exit job at the time of doing the exit panel, and you would follow the instructions and the things that you do at that time. If the disabled worker is employed at intake and they have a part-time job and still receiving unemployment, should the part-time job be entered? I'm going to defer to Jim. That's more of a something that would be a question for like the career planner side of things. That's not really my area. That's more an eligibility client creation thing. So Jim, if you could answer that question that just came in. Do not record the part-time job. It gets auto-populated in by IDES. Okay, there's your answer for that. Only record the dislocation job at the time of the application on the dislocated worker eligibility. Okay, we are going to move on to the next screen. And as we were talking about, any job associated with the WIOA dislocated worker eligibility will not be eligible to be updated by the LSA at the application level. This is all going to require requests for IWDS modification. So it kind of locks you out from making that mistake. You're going to definitely want to contact the system administrators, and we will walk you through and we will help you make the corrections necessary. And whether or not it requires a form, we'll make that determination when you call in or email. Moving on to services. Some services will allow the local system administrator to make changes, but some won't. And rather than go through each individual service, as there are dozens, we're just going to talk about this in generalities. On the services screen, the local system administrator just needs to check on the individual service records and see if, go back, there we go, and see if they're able to make a change to that service or not. There's going to be some fields that you're not going to be able to change no matter what. But in this case, the local system administrator is going to look at the development of an IEP service. So the screenshot for the development of an IEP for Ruth Aaron is here on the right. And the local system administrator is able to switch which grant has been picked. They're able to select the weekly hours, and they're able to change and add comments. Any changes to the rest of these are going to require either a system administrator or an IWDS modification request form. You also have the ability, as the local system administrator, to delete the service. However, one of the things that I'm going to point out, and this is something that, once again, it's the order of things. There are certain services that are required before you're allowed to do other services. This is extremely important when it comes to the youth services. It's also important when we're talking about the 1A and the 1D with you have to do the development of an IEP, you have to do some of these other initial services before you move on and create the remaining career services. So don't go to this delete service without making sure that you're not removing a service that's required. If that's the case, you're going to want to talk with the system administrators, get a hold of me, get a hold of Jim Potts. We'll help you out. We'll look at this. We'll figure out what exactly is going on, and if there's changes that need made, or if we need to remove other services in order to go back and remove this particular service, then we'll help you out, help you figure that out. Now, each service is going to have different fields that are open and closed. Now, like I said, there are dozens of different kinds of services. We're not going to look at each individual one. We're just talking about it in generalities. So, if the start date of a service is wrong, whatever the service is, that service will need to be deleted and re-entered, because even the IWDS system administrators, we don't have the power to change the start date of a service. We would have to, the only way that could be corrected without having to delete the record would be to go to the programmers. And right now, the programmers are on higher level priority projects, and we're not going to take something like this to them. Not something that we have workarounds for. We're going to work with you. It means that we have to delete multiple services for the career planner to go in and make the correction and then re-enter everything. Then that's what will have to happen. Some services, as we were talking about earlier, may not allow the local system administrator to delete them if other services are present on the client that require prerequisite services. So, for example, trying to delete the IEP when it's required in order to do any other services is probably going to give you an error. And if you do receive an error when trying to make corrections to services, you want to make a screenshot of them and use that and send it in the email that you're sending to the system administrators. It helps us to kind of see what the error message is, so we know we have a starting point. Moving over to the list case notes. The list case notes screen, the local system administrator is able to click on the individual case note that they want to update. Local system administrators are not able to delete case notes. Any case notes that need deleted require an IWDS modification request form or direct email or conversation with a system administrator. We do know that occasionally the career planners get in a rush and they put the wrong case note on the wrong client. I just recently had to delete 7 case notes that were entered on the wrong client. They meant to be in a different client and enter those notes, and instead they entered them on the client they were working on previously, and we just needed to go in and delete them. And it's not a problem. We just want to make sure that we're getting exactly the right things, and we need documentation and clear instruction from you as to which case notes are the incorrect ones. On the Maintain Case Note screen, the local system administrator is able to change which program, which note category, whether or not the note is confidential, the subject, and the case note itself. The local system administrator is not able to change the staff name or the contact date. If those fields need updated, then the record needs to be deleted and have the career planner re-enter the case note, because we are not able to change it either. Anything involving an application in exiter status needs to be sent to the WIOA performance measure staff and CC the IWDS system administrator. So you're going to send it to Paula and Mark Burgess, and then you're going to CC Chris and Jim, because the corrections may affect past quarters that have already been reported. And the WIOA performance measure staff needs to be involved anytime you're making a change to an exiter. They have to either make the change themselves or they need to approve that we're going to make the change. The WIOA performance measure staff also handles exiting clients that are over the date limit, as well as removing an exit from a client in order for you to add additional information to them, such as services, or if they really didn't exit and they were exited in error. Local system administrator is not able to do anything on the general exit screen once a client's been exited. You're going to have to submit an email to the WIOA performance measure staff with the CC to the IWDS system administrators. This can also be submitted with a request for IWDS modification form submission if you choose. If this is something that's found during the course of a monitoring event, then obviously you're going to want to go ahead and fill out the modification request form, send it through that way, and then the IWDS monitors will send it to the proper people for them to look at. When submitting IWDS modification forms to the monitors, the LWIAs are separated into 3 regions. We have Northern, Central, and Southern. Northern includes LWIAs 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, and 27. Central has 4, 13, 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, and 21. And then 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 are in Southern. The OET contacts for each of these regions, the monitors are in the Northern region, it's Matt Hillen. In the Central region, it's Brian Tippy. In the Southern region, it is Elizabeth Shue. Their contact information will be included at the end of the slideshow. The current version of the IWDS modification form is on the right. The LWIA is able to request a copy of this form from any of the OET monitoring staff. The local system administrator, not the career planner, should fill out this form and email it along with supporting documentations and or screenshots for the modification to their assigned OET monitoring staff member. Monitoring staff will review the request, and if they approve it, they will forward it to the IWDS support staff, either the WIOA performance group, where it will go to Paula Berry and Mark Burgess, or it will come to Jim Potts or Chris Tynan for registrants and other issues. And then when we complete the modification, we'll return it to the monitoring staff. If possible, when you are submitting a request for modification, please try to include the screenshot of the error, as well as the supporting documentation for the change. This is especially important when we're dealing with a date of birth or a social security number or the spelling of a name. I'm not going to change a date of birth unless you've given me some kind of documentation showing that the birth date needs corrected. I've sent things back before to the monitor stating that I need the proof, the documentation in order for me to make those changes. So try to get that information and include it in the request when you're making it. In general, any time that you're having to email the IWDS system administrators or the performance measuring staff or the monitoring staff about IWDS client, it is best to try to include the screenshots of the error or issue. It gives us some place to start. Okay. Before we start on transferring clients, I'm going to ask if there are any questions at all up to this point about IWDS modifications and what kind of supporting documentation you have to include and changes you guys are able to make on these other screens. Are there any questions before we move forward into the idea of transferring the client? Since self-attestations are acceptable for several documentations on eligibility, if you don't have the actual documents, how do we want to handle that situation? I would say that in a case like that, where you've done something where a self-attestation is your documentation, we're going to be talking about a case-by-case situation. If it's about a Social Security number, you need to get a copy of the Social Security card. There's too many cases of identity theft. There's too many cases of other things along those lines where when we're talking about something that is that important, it's going to require the documentation. Especially if we're making a change. Now, if it's something where it's a self-attestation of the date of birth and you don't have a driver's license or a state ID, then that's going to be a different situation. And I think that we're talking about some different situations from piece to piece where it's going to be different on a case-by-case basis, especially when we're talking about those self-attestations. So if it's a self-attestation, I would put in there that the documentation or that the original information or the change of information is coming from a self-attestation. And if we need additional documentation, we will let you know. I noticed that we have someone saying that they have another meeting to attend. The PowerPoints and the supporting documentation are going to be sent out after the training is completed. We're almost done with part one, which is the editing the IWDS client screens, and we will start with the user IDs. If you want to watch the webinar later, which will get posted, we'll make sure that everybody has the URL in order to go get it. You can watch the other half of this training later. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. So we're going to move on to transferring clients between LWIAs. Now, basic premise of this is that sometimes clients have a reason to switch LWIAs. It could be for a physical move or for another valid reason. It's not always that the person moved from LWIA 20 up to LWIA 3. It could be something as simple as is that there's a reason, and it's a valid reason, that the two LWIAs acknowledge in order to transfer the client. Now, the process of transferring the client from one LWIA to another, the giving and the receiving LWIAs both need to agree to make the transfer. You don't have to agree to make the transfer. It needs to be understood that the gaining LWIA is accepting the client for performance outcomes and any future monitoring or data validation that might occur with the client. If you take a look at the client and you think it's going to adversely affect your performance outcomes, and you do not want to accept the transfer, you don't have to. You can say no. There is nothing that requires you to accept a client transfer. So, as it says down here, this is something that I got from Paula. The receiving LWIA does not have to accept the transfer if they don't want to be responsible for the client, such as if the client would be a negative effect on their performance outcomes. And like I said, I think some of the LWIAs may not understand that you have the ability to say no if you look at this client and you don't want them. Once all parties have agreed to the client transfer, then the local administrator for the OWIA, whether you are the giving or the receiving, sends an email to both of the IWDS system administrators. So you're sending an email to both Jim Potts and Chris Tynan, and you are CCing the local system administrator for the other OWIA on the email. So in a imaginary situation here, LWIA 20 is transferring a client to LWIA 3. LWIA 20 sends an email to Chris Tynan and Jim Potts and CCs the local system administrator for LWIA 3 on the email. In the email, you're going to detail the customer name, the last 4 SSN, the Illinois WorkNet Center location, and name of the case manager who's going to be taking over the client in the receiving LWIA. So in a lot of cases, sometimes it's best for the email to come from the receiving LWIA, but it doesn't have to. The receiving LWIA local system administrator must either state in the email or send a reply to the email from the giving LWIA that they are accepting the transfer. If I don't have an email from the receiving LWIA stating that they are accepting the transfer, I'm not going to initiate it. Once all of this has occurred, the IWDS system administrators will submit the transfer to the programming staff, and when it is completed, we will notify both of the LWIAs. Finally, the receiving LWIA must receive all of the original hard copy files with all of the supporting documentation, not copies. The original documents follow the client to the new LWIA. Sometimes the giving LWIA will choose to keep a copy of everything for their records since they expended grant money on the client, but it is not required. However, the giving LWIA will be making copies. They do not keep the original documents. The original documents must be sent to the receiving LWIA. And that is the end of this part of the presentation, part 1. Are there any questions about transferring clients between LWIAs? So the contact information for the IWDS system administrators and the WIOA performance measure staff are here. We keep getting moved around offices quite a bit right now, and there is the potential in the next year that we may move offices again, which is why, honestly, email is probably the best way to do things. It creates a better paper trail. It creates something where we have record of when a person was contacted, when the question was submitted, when, et cetera. I recommend email over phone in most cases. There are phone numbers to reach Jim Potts or Chris Tynan or Mark Burgess with performance measures. However, I strongly recommend going through email first. And if you'd like a phone call returned, you can state that in the email, and I'll be happy to call you back at a time that I'm able to. But personally, I prefer the email and the paper trail. The contacts for the monitoring staff are as follows. Just for everyone's knowledge, Annie Dorr retired. So Central Region currently does not have a regional manager. Anything that would be normally going to Annie Dorr, you are to send to Kelly and Brian, the northern and southern managers, until the new central manager is hired and is brought up to speed. I know that job posting went out, and they'll probably start interviewing for it here in a few weeks. Monitoring staff, the contact information for Matt Hillen, Brian Tippy, and Elizabeth Shue are all listed here. The fiscal program Programmatic Monitoring Manager, Tamika Chisholm. Her information is there. And if there are no additional questions, we will take a short 10-minute break, and we will go right back into the IWDS, IES, IBIS user IDs. That one shouldn't take too very long. All right, we are taking a 10-minute break, and we will pick everything back up at 3:20. And we are now at 3:20. Break is over. We're going to start with the IWDS System Administrator Training Series. We're going to be talking about user IDs for IWDS, IBIS, and IES. Acronyms used in this presentation, as well as in conversations, emails, etc. DCEO stands for Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. OET is DCEO, Office of Employment and Training. IWDS is the Illinois Workforce Development System. IBIS, IBIS is the Illinois Benefit Information System. IES is Integrated Eligibility System. IWNC is Illinois WorkNet Center. FDA is a Shared Data Agreement. LSA is a Local System Administrator. And an ASA, which is a new one, is the Agency Security Administrator for IES. And each OWIA should have one of those as well. 3 systems we're talking about is the IWDS with the local OWIA, IBIS, Illinois Benefit Information System, and IES, Integrated Eligibility System. The 3 different systems are owned by different departments at the state of Illinois. IWDS, both the local OWIA and the OWIA 90 for statewide grants, is a system owned by DCEO. IBIS is a system owned by IDES, the Illinois Department of Employment Security. And IES is a system jointly owned by HFS, Illinois Department of Healthcare and Family Services, and DHS, the Illinois Department of Human Services. This is important because each department owns their own systems, which means, for example, as a DCEO employee, I'm not able to make changes for systems owned by the IDES or DHS, and vice versa. First, we're going to talk about the IDES data sharing agreement. And this is important for IWDS as well as the IBIS forms. In order to gain access to IWDS, IBIS, or IES, each user must have a signed IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form, attachment D shared data agreement, on file with OET. This form needs to be filed with the FDA liaison, which is Carrie Compardo, via email before any access rights to IWDS are granted, either by the IWDS system administrators, Jim Potts or Chris Tynan, or the LWIA local system administrators when you're creating a new user ID for an LWIA user. The local system administrators are not to add new users to IDES or to IWDS until they submit the IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form to the FDA liaison. So you have to turn in the form filled out and signed before you create the ID. Now, the local system administrator does not need to wait for confirmation. The LSA will only be contacted by the FDA liaison about the FDA form if there is an issue. If the user changes their name, their work address, and or their work email, then the local system administrator will need to submit and file a new SDA form for the user with their updated information. So if you have an employee with a legal name change, usually marriage or divorce, or an employee that moves office locations, or if an employee has issued a new work email, then the local system administrator for the LWIA needs to submit updated SDA forms for each employee that are affected. So if you have 10 employees that are all at one office location and that office moves, and now all of them have a new work location, all 10 of them would need new shared data agreement forms submitted. You do not have to suspend their IWDS access in the meantime. It's just something that in order for the forms to be up to date and all information to be correct with the CEO, that you as the LWIA local system administrators are responsible for doing. The local system administrator should fill out the IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form and have the employee sign it before you submit it to the SDA liaison. Once the SDA form is submitted, you create the IWDS ID. If there are any issues, the SDA liaison will contact you for corrections, updates, clarification, whatever. Now, when submitting forms, we prefer that you do separate PDFs for multiple users. So once again, you have those 10 people that changed offices. We don't want one PDF with all 10 of them in there, because we're going to have to break those out into individual PDFs in order for us to do what we need to do here. It would be much easier on everyone if you just do one PDF per user, per form, and submit them separately. Now, in the case of the SDAs, it's not a problem if you attach multiple PDFs and submit and say, we have 5 new employees, here are the 5 FDA forms. That's not an issue in this particular case. For the FDA side of things, as far as I know from talking with Carrie, she does not have a problem with receiving multiple FDA PDFs in one email. The IWDS local LWIA. When you are creating a new IWDS LWIA staff user and a new IWDS local system administrators, these are the things that you're going to do. You can grant or remove user roles to any of those IDs that are in your LWIA. You're able to re-enable IWDS LWIA users that have been disabled by the system. IWDS automatically disables any user that has not logged in within the last 35 days. You can reset IWDS LWIA user passwords if necessary, and you can disable IWDS users who are no longer employed by the LWIA, which is important for user audits. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new IWDS user. The Add User screen in IWDS requires the first name, the last name, the phone number, the email address. Your LWIA will be auto-filled, and then the choices for your Illinois WorkNet Center is going to be populated only with choices that are associated with your LWIA. Your Illinois WorkNet Center partner drop-down field has all the following choices. The last choice in the drop-down is the one that you should always be selecting for your LWIA users. It'll always be reflected to your LWIA, the LWIA number and your base location. This is how the user should look when completed. So we have sample user, and then the system generates the username. Last login is the default date because they have not logged into the system. Enabled equals yes, no disabled reason, and all the other information is filled in. At the bottom, you're going to select what user roles you want to grant them. Each role allows users to access different features in IWDS. There are roles that are view only. There are roles that are data entry, roles that access to run reports, supervisor roles, and a local system administrator role. You select the IWDS user roles based on the user's position at the LWIA, whether they're a career planner, a grant manager, a supervisor, etc. When all the roles are selected that you want to put on this user, you click Save to continue. IWDS generates a pop-up message at the top of the screen with the new IWDS username and their temporary password when the user is saved. So for example, sample user becomes S user. Now, if there was already someone in here, S user, then the system creates S user 1 or S user 2 and so on. So if you end up with someone who's got a fairly common name, John Smith, J Smith will be the first person created with that name, then J Smith 1, J Smith 2. You could even have Jeremy Smith, and he could end up being J Smith 9. It's just going to automatically increment as new people come in who have that first initial last name that are the same. IWDS also creates an Illinois WorkNet ID and password for the new user that will be in that original informational message. I recommend when you do this that you get a screenshot or a cut snip of that informational message that'll be at the top of your screen in yellow, and then kind of like what I did here, and paste it into the email to the new user. IWDS user management. As a local system administrator, you'll have the ability to re-enable disabled IWDS users and reset their passwords if they forget them or have a problem. IWDS, as I said earlier, automatically disables any user that hasn't logged into the system within the past 35 days. The far right column, enabled, shows an N for no when things like this happen. It could be that the person has been disabled because they were marked as no longer employed. But if it's an active user and they've got an N for enabled over here, chances are it's because they were auto-disabled by the system. To re-enable a user, you first change the enabled from no to yes and change the disabled reason from long-term inactivity to the blank line. Then you click Save. Then this user is now enabled again and they could log in without any additional help. However, if they also need their password changed, you need to do that as a separate task. So you'll re-enable the person first, save it, then go back in and reset the password. You cannot do both at the same time. If you try to do that at the same time, what will happen is that it will give you the password reset, but when you click the save, they're still going to be disabled. So once you've re-enabled the user for long-term inactivity, that person has to log into IWDS the same day that you've re-enabled them. Otherwise, the IWDS system will automatically disable their account again overnight when it searches for the people who have gone over 35 days without a login. So if this person is needing to be re-enabled, make sure they understand that I've enabled you, you need to log in today. Resetting the password for IWDS users, you just simply click the Reset Password button, and it gives you an informational message with the temporary password in the yellow. This password is good until it is used, at which point the IWDS system will automatically force the user to update their password when they log in with that temporary number. If something happens where you've sent them a password reset and they've lost it, or you didn't write it down, or you forgot to get the screenshot, it's not a problem to go in and click reset password again and get another one. And I apologize for the background noise of the howling cats. They're playing with the kitten, and I think they're being a little louder than they think they are. The joys of working remotely. Anyway, IWDS user management. If you're looking at the IWDS user record to see, you can see when the last time they actually logged into the system. So if for some reason you're wanting to check to see whether or not someone is getting into IWDS weekly or daily to work on their clients, or if you've got reason to suspect that you asked them to go in and do something and you don't think they did it, you can go pull up their user ID and it will tell you right up the top when what date they last logged into IWDS was. So it is a way for you to monitor how often some of your users, or when the last time your user logged into IWDS was. If the last login appears like this and says 1/1 of 1900, that is the default date that is added to a client or to a user ID when it's created. So that means they have never logged into IWDS with this user ID. To deactivate a user in IWDS, you're going to change the enabled from yes to no, and you're going to change the disabled reason to no longer employed by partner. Both of these steps are required. There are multiple options in the drop-down for the disabled reason. If there's another reason that is more appropriate than no longer employed by partners, then choose that one. There's duplicate information entered. There's a couple others that may be appropriate, but 99% of the time, no longer employed by partner is going to be the one you want. Since IWDS is a reporting legacy system that stores user data in relation to client data, we do not delete users. We only disable them. So what that means is historically, all these older records, whether it's the application level, whether it's some of the other information, test scores, case notes, universal services, it records what user put them in. And we want to keep that information, so we're not going to delete the users. We're going to keep them, we're just going to disable them because we want the historical data. It is the responsibility of the LWIA local system administrators to deactivate any LWIA employee or subcontractor that is no longer employed by the LWIA in a timely manner. Ideally, you should disable the user on the same day their employment was terminated. You do not want someone accessing the system after they have left employment. And we will discuss the deactivation email that needs to be sent to OET later in the training. Local system administrators are the only people at the LWIA who have the authorization to make user access or removal requests for OET for IBIS, IES, or IWDS systems. So, if your director is wanting to email OET to make changes or requests, then they need to have a IWDS local system administrator ID. It is the only way that I have to keep a list of who has the authority to make changes. So they may not be active. They may turn around and be on, they may not log in very often. You probably have some local system administrators who only get in some of the time and aren't in there on a daily basis. They're still on my active local system administrator spreadsheet that I keep until you actually go in and mark them as no longer employed by partner. I keep track of all that. We keep a list. That way there we know who has the authority to request changes. Now, when you're making these changes, emails are to be sent with the necessary forms to the appropriate OET staff for all LWIA users. If OET is contacted directly by a user for access requests or a password reset, we are going to instruct them to go back to their local LWIA, local system administrator, for that information. Users should not contact the state help desk for user access or password resets. The state help desk will contact the OET and they will be told by us not to reset the password. The LWIA is responsible for the LWIA users in IWDS. LWIA 90 users for the statewide grants. Access is requested through the IWDS system administrators. So the only people who can create IWDS LWIA 90 IDs are Jim Potts and Chris Tylen. The requests need to be submitted by the OET grant manager or by the local system administrator for the main LWIA with the OET grant manager CC'd on the email. We need to know which LWIA 90 grant is being used when we create the user ID. It's the user letter that we send out after we create the LWIA 90 user ID does have some grant specific portions in the wording of the letter. So that's why the grant manager needs to be on that in order for us to properly detail the user letter. All LWIA 90 users must have an IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form on file with OET. So before we will grant the LWIA 90 access. So if they've already got a data sharing agreement on file from your local LWIA and they already have a local LWIA user ID and IWDS, that's fine, that counts. But if you hired them just specifically to do LWIA 90 grants, then you're going to need to submit a the data sharing agreement acknowledgement form before we can create the ID. Local system administrators should contact the IWDS system administrators at OET for IWDS LWIA 90 user password resets or to disable the LWIA 90 users. So essentially, Jim Potts and Chris Tylen are the local system administrators for LWIA 90. No one else has the authority to go in there and create or disable LWIA 90 users. No one else has the ability to go in and reset LWIA 90 passwords, and no one else has the ability to go into LWIA 90 users and re-enable them if they're over the 35-day limit and got auto-disabled by the system. Any corrections to an LWIA 90 client application information will also need to be submitted to the IWDS system administrators at OET. Any assistance with exits or performance on LWIA 90 clients needs to be submitted to the performance measure staff, Paula Berry and Mark Burgess, with a CC to the system administrators. When LWIA 90 users who are no longer employed by the LWIA, or if they simply no longer need LWIA 90 access, you guys are done with that statewide grant, you need to email the IWDS system administrators, Jim Potts and Chris Tylen, and the SDA liaison, Terry Compardo, to inform them of the change so the LWIA 90 ID can be disabled. Moving on to IBIS. IBIS, the Illinois Benefit Information System, is a program owned by IDES, the Illinois Department of Employment Security, and it contains unemployment benefit information. Accessing the IBIS system, users need both a PKI digital ID issued by the state with the Department of Information Technology, do it, and they need a RACF ID, which will be issued through DCEO. Requests to add, remove, or reset passwords for IBIS users must be submitted by LWIA local system administrators to the IBIS coordinator. And Chris Tylen, me, I am the IBIS coordinator. IBIS access is requested by the local system administrator by submitting the Bureau of Agency Services, ITM, External User ID Request Form to the IBIS coordinator. Users must have an IDES Data Sharing Agreement Acknowledgement Form on file before IBIS access will be granted. These forms can be submitted at the same time. Please submit separate PDFs for each individual user. In this case, I save the PDFs for a paper trail on the user ID creation. So I don't want to have Jane Smith, John Doe, and Jeff Johnson all in the same PDF. I want them separated. Changes to user information name, such as the name, the work address, the work email, or the work phone, needs to be submitted to the IBIS coordinator and the SDA liaison via email so that we can update the user information. OET is only, and this is important, only authorized to process IBIS access for LWIA employees that are using the system for WIOA activities. So if someone else in your office who is not doing WIOA activities, is not working in IWDS, is not doing things with the IWDS system and eligibility and career planner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they cannot request an IBIS RACF access through you to me unless it's for WIOA purposes. Gaining access to IBIS. Once the IBIS coordinator receives the completed signed form and verifies the user has an SDA on file, then I submit the RACF security group to have the RACF ID created. The IBIS coordinator only submits to the RACF security group once a week, usually on Friday afternoons. Whatever my last day of the week is going to be. If Friday's a holiday, I do it on Thursday. If I know I'm taking Thursday and Friday off, I do it on Wednesday. But whatever my last day of the work week is, that's the day that the security group wants me to submit these once per week. They have asked that it only be done once per week so that they are not overloaded with multiple requests over the course of the work week. After the RACF security group issues the RACF IDs, the new RACF IDs are then submitted to another security group over at IDES to assign IBIS access to the RACF ID number. So it is a process. First, the RACF ID has to be made. Then it has to have the IBIS permissions added. Then once they are activated, then I'm finally able to give it back to you guys. Once this is completed, the IBIS coordinator will then send an email back to the LWIA with several attachments that detail how to reset the password on the new RACF ID, as well as changes that will need to be made to the Microsoft Edge browser, possibly to whitelist URLs or other things with your IT staff or your firewall, along with instructions on how to log into IBIS. This process takes 1 to 2 weeks. If you submit on Monday, it's not going out till Friday. Usually, by the following Friday, you will get the ID back. But if people are out of the office over at the RACF security group, or someone's out of the office over at IDES security group, it can take 2 weeks. So, as we were saying, if you give me the signed form on Monday, the user doesn't get submitted till Friday. Best case scenario, the local system administrator gets the new rack FID and instructions following Friday. But it can take longer. If you do not hear anything for 3 Fridays after you've submitted, that's when you want to contact me and ask what's going on. I haven't heard anything back. It could be that the email got lost. It could be that maybe I didn't send it to the right person. I didn't, instead of hitting reply, it changed the email. Generally, what we've found is that sometimes these go to junk, and in a couple of cases, we actually, because there's generally 5 or 6 attachments on the email that comes with the new user ID, we actually had a situation where we needed to make sure that the @illinois.gov domain was whitelisted for all of the emails at a particular LWIA. Their firewall was sending the emails to the junk folder because there were too many attachments. It happens. Then here's a copy of the form. Everything in yellow is what needs to be filled out in order to submit for RACF ID. So we got to have, you mark that it's a new ID request. You put the person's name, their work phone number, their work address, the LWIA that they're working from, their work email. You're going to request access to IMS TSO host system application, and you're going to mark the first box right here. It's inquiry only. The PKI digital certificate ID goes here. We'll talk about that more here in a second. And then they have to sign it and date it. Then you create the PDF and send it in. The PKI digital ID is the digital certificate ID username that is referred to on this form. To obtain this ID, the user must access the Department of Innovation and Technology, DOIT, website, and they create their own unique ID that they choose. It is not assigned. Please make sure that your users understand that this is not their IWDS ID. This is a separate step that they must complete on their own. They will need their state of Illinois driver's license number in the process of creating this unique ID. If they do not have a state of Illinois driver's license, for those of you who have LWIAs on the borders, it's not the end of the world. But on the same instruction form, there will be a phone number to call for DOIT for assistance. And if a person has a Missouri driver's license, a Wisconsin driver's license, an Iowa driver's license, an Indiana driver's license, they're going to need to call and speak with the DOIT representative about creating a PKI digital ID with an out-of-state ID. So once again, we talk about this situation here. This is on one of the PDFs that I send out to you guys. It's got the link. You're going to go to this particular link to create your PKI digital ID. It says over here on the side, digital ID support. If you have problems, do not contact OET. There's absolutely nothing I can do for you or your users for help with the PKI digital ID. It is not my department, and I'm not able to affect it. They're going to need to call the help desk at one of the 2 numbers. They select, now the last time I went through, this was still accurate, but I always say the caveat that the menus could change, so make sure you're listening. They need to pick option 1 or whatever option it is for computer-related issue, and then they pick the option for digital ID support, and then when you're prompted, you respond by saying that this is for a digital ID. When the user is sent their new RACF user ID, they will receive several PDF with required system settings in order to make IBIS work in Microsoft Edge. This is another thing that is extremely important that as a local system administrator, you stress to your users. Edge is the only, and I repeat, only browser approved by IDES for use with IBIS. No other browser will work properly, and use of Chrome or Firefox or Safari or whatever browser they want to use can actually cause issues with the data. IBIS will not work with any other browser than Microsoft Edge. It is designed for it. It is contractual, not my choice. Failure to make the browser settings and or whitelisting the IBIS URLs with your local IT department firewalls are the main reasons that users are not able to access IBIS once they receive their ID. When the email is sent, these are the 5 current PDFs that I have that I send out that are required settings changes to make IBIS work on your PC or laptop. They are sent out via email along with the initial new user ID PDF letter. I update these when I am notified by IDES of a change. There are browser settings in Edge, there's firewall and whitelist settings, and more that need to be made. The user may have to contact your local LWIA or location IT department to make some of these changes. Once all of these are done, the next step in using their RACF ID is to reset the password. If the IBIS user needs a password reset, or if the user gets an error message that the RACF ID is revoked or suspended, those are important words, revoked or suspended, then the local system administrator will email both the RACF ID number, the MHD followed by the 4 numbers, and the user's name to the IBIS coordinator. The first thing I do is I verify that the user is using the correct RACF ID and that they didn't mix up a number. It happens. Then I will submit to the RACF security group for reset. Normally we get those back the same day, but I can't guarantee it. Sometimes it can take 2-3 days, or if the guy's on vacation that week, we may not get it back until the following week. If the person, the vacation coverage guy is overwhelmed with too much other stuff going on that he can't do the reset. So normally when I know that there's going to be an outage like that or the guy's going on vacation, I send a notice out to you guys and let you know. OET is only authorized to process RACF password resets for the OET IBIS users that I have in my database that I track. And if they need the password reset to access IBIS, not GRS, not SNAP, not any other state of Illinois program. I am not authorized to make password resets for GRS. I can't do it. If I make that request, I can get in trouble. I need to verify that the reset is for IBIS, that the user is in my database, and then I send it on. When we get the password reset, it is only good for 48 hours. Now, if you get it on a Friday, it's supposed to be good until Tuesday. But if you get the password reset and you request it on Monday and I send it back to you on Monday and you don't send it to your user till Wednesday, it's probably not going to work. Or if you send it to them and they don't do it for a couple of days, it's not going to work. We'll end up needing to get another reset. Now, if the IBIS user gets an error message that the RACF ID is expired, important word here, that means that they are able to go in and make the change to their password without requesting a reset. Expired just means that it has been between 30 and 34 days since they last changed their RACF password. IBIS users can change their password anytime they want to for their RACF ID. They just need to click the link for neonweb.h.cmcsstate.il.us change password. They have to make the change on Neon Web. They cannot change the password from the IBIS website. Maybe someday they'll get it to the point where you can, but as of right now, you cannot. To reset your RACF ID for accessing IBIS, you go to the Neon Web, like I said. Neon Web comes up looking like this. It's a change MVS password on your browser. And we have the 4 things that need filled in. Now, for example, MHD XXXX. If their old password, now this is if they remember their old password and they know it, and we didn't have to get a temporary password for them through a reset, then they enter their old password. If we had to submit for a reset, then their old password is now the new temporary one they just got sent. And then we have the new password and retype the new password. And there are requirements for that we'll discuss here in a minute. So your MVS user ID is your RACF, the MHD followed by four numbers. Your old password is either your old password because you're changing it on your own and didn't get a reset, or it is the temporary password from the password reset email. It is if you requested a password reset, then your previous password has been replaced by the reset. Your new password must meet the following requirements. It has to be exactly 8 characters. It has to contain at least 1 letter. It is not case sensitive. It has to have at least 1 number, and it has to have one of the 3 approved special characters: #, hashtag, $, or @. And the password cannot begin with the special character. The password cannot be your first name or last name. It looks for that. It cannot be abbreviations or names of months, Jan, Feb, June, July, etc. And the password cannot be something that you've used in the last 12 months. It is recommended to use a password that you're able to increment, like flower #1, coffee $1, plant @01. If you are successful changing the password, the following message will appear: MVS password changed successfully. And it says the password for your user ID has been changed. Common errors that happen to IBIS users trying to reset their passwords. Number 1, they try to do the reset on the IBIS website instead of Neon Web. Number 2, they are using a browser other than Microsoft Edge. Number 3, they try to use their previous password in the old password field instead of the temporary password from the ID reset that was just issued. Number 4, I hate to say it, they don't bother to read the password instructions. Most common issue is the user not using one of the 3 approved symbols, and they try to use something other than one of those 3 in the new password. If you are contacting OET with a problem with accessing IBIS, please include a screenshot of the error or what screen the user is stuck on. That helps me to speed up the process of elimination of what could be causing the error. When deactivating an IBIS user, email the IBIS coordinator to OET. Just email, tell me the user RACF ID if you have it, and then I create the deactivation request form from my IBIS user database. And then I submit that to the RACF security group once a week. If the OEA employee leaves your employment, you must notify the IBIS coordinator and the SDA liaison as soon as possible. It could be a violation of the data sharing agreement if a user accesses IBIS after they were no longer employed by your OEA. Now, in the situation where you feel that you need to have them disabled immediately, and you don't want to take any chances, tell me that in the email, and I will immediately request a password reset. Even though I can't submit the form until Friday, I can submit for a password reset any day of the week, and then they won't be able to log in because the password's changed. So it essentially locks them out of the ID immediately. Any questions about IBIS? All right, we're going to move on to IES, Integrated Eligibility System. It's a computer-based public benefits application and management system. The joint initiative from HFS and DHS, where users are able to view current client eligibility information. You will see all benefits, medical, SNAP, TANF, for at least the last 12 months, earned and unearned income used to determine benefit eligibility, client notices, dates, and family members included in the case. IES data is granted to OEAs as a subcontractor to OET through a shared data agreement with DCEO and DHS. If you have any questions regarding your agency's access to IES system, you will contact the SDA liaison, which is Carrie Compardo. Now, once again, it's the same rules as IBIS. If the users are trying to request access, it has to be for WIOA activities. If someone in your office is just wanting to get access to IES for something else, then there are other ways for them to get that ID, and you do not come through us to get it. It will be denied, and we will send it back to you and tell you that they need to figure out how to get access otherwise. I do not have that information. They would need to contact the HFS or DHS to find out how to do it. Now, IES has slightly different rules to the local system administrators. IES requires that every OEA have 2 ASAs, Agency Security Administrators, selected for each OEA. DCEO requires that the ASAs also be IWDS local system administrators so that we have consistency and we have it makes sense on the email list that I have. I don't want to be trying to separate things out. We want the ASAs to be IWDS LSAs. The ASAs for the LWIA are the only local system administrators that can request to add or delete an IES user. So if you have 6 local system administrators for your LWIA, all 6 of them are able to make IWDS IDs. All 6 of them are able to request changes to IWDS. All 6 of them can ask to have IBIS users added, reset, deactivated, but only the 2 that are listed as ASAs for IES can make or request changes, add, delete for an IES user. If you do not know who your ASAs are for your LWIA, you should contact Carrie Compardo after this training and make sure who's listed as the two ASAs for your LWIA. IES access is requested by the LWIA ASA through the OET SDA liaison. Each staff person from your agency requesting an IES access will need to have a signed IDES data sharing agreement acknowledgement form on file. They will have to complete the Systems Access Request IL444-2022 form and submit it to the SBA liaison. You will review the HIPAA and privacy policy training for externals and external security awareness training. You will complete and sign the IES HIPAA privacy policy training attestation and the IES certificate of understanding. Both forms have to be signed by the user's supervisor and completed annually. All of those forms will then be submitted to the SBA liaison. Here is a copy of the current form. The user completes the highlighted user information fields and signs the form. DCEO then signs as the community provider down here where the blue is. The ASA sends the request form, the IES HIPAA privacy policy training attestation, and the IES certificate of understanding, all three to the OET SBA liaison to request the ID creation. This form is required in order to activate, deactivate, or reactivate a user. The ASA will have to fill out the form each time. If a user does not log into IES for 60 days and their password expires, then their access is revoked. IES does not do password resets. You're either active or you're not. So if they go 60 days without logging into IES, the ASA will have to fill out this form again and resubmit for an reactivation to the SBA liaison. So basically, you're having to request access every time. So it's important for them to keep up with and make sure that they are not letting their password expire. Updating user information, a name change, work address, work email, work phone. Anytime that any of that happens, the LSA, ASA must submit a new form to the SBA liaison. If you have an inactive user reset, users are required to change their password and log in every 60 days. So if they aren't using the system, they're going to get locked out, and then you'll have to turn in a new form. If the user fails to change their password within those 60 days, they are going to be locked out of IES and their status goes to inactive. Once they become inactive, then they have to have a new form submitted for reactivation. Deactivating a user. Anytime a user leaves the agency, the local system administrator must complete and submit to the SBA liaison versus a copy of the exact same form again to delete the user in order to stay compliant with the DCEO DHS shared data agreement. The deactivation request does not require the user's signature. IES user request processing time. We don't have any control over how long this takes. When the ASA submits an access request form for the user to be created, the SBA liaison has to review it, sign as a community provider, and submit to DHS for them to process. The SBA liaison and the OET staff have no control over how long it takes for DHS to process the form and activate the user. Sometimes it can be less than a week. Sometimes it can be over a month. However, if it has been more than 2 weeks since you submitted the application, it is recommended for the ASA email and ask the SBA liaison to email DHS and ask for an update on the user. I do not have any kind of instruction sheet for changing the password in IES. Once again, we go back to the different state agencies. DHS and HFS have not sent me anything to relay on to you or to give me any kind of insight on how to help users. Maybe that's something that we might be able to see if Carrie can get, but they have not given me anything. And since it is their system, I can't go and do anything about it. I have to rely on their instructions and their way of doing things. So, as a summary, and this is the top half of I have a PDF that I send out that has creating and deactivating users. This is the top half of that PDF. So for all new users, these are the instructions of what you have to do when creating a new IWDS ID, when creating an IWDS LWIA 90 ID request, an IES user request, or an IBIS user request. These are the people who need to be contacted in each one of these situations. You can do it in one email with all the forms attached, or you can do individual emails for the different IDs. It's up to you. On the shared data agreement acknowledgement form, please make sure that the LWIA provider and location are filled in. Otherwise, it will be returned to you for requesting the missing information. That is a common mistake that we have had when providing the shared data agreement forms to the FDA liaison. When you are submitting the form, please send the user address, the user email address, and the location address in the body of the email, so that it is clear in the email that this is the FDA form for this person at this work address with this work email. Then we have a summary of what to do when deactivating users. This is the bottom half of that PDF that I mentioned that I send out to you guys pretty often. So if they have a local LWIA IWDS ID, this is what you do. And the local LWIA, local system administrator, is responsible for going in and disabling the LWIA IWDS IDs, not DCEO. If it's an LWIA 90 IWDS ID, you have to send it to Jim Potts and Chris Tylen. It's an IES ID. You fill out and send the IES deactivation form to Carrie Compardo, and you CC me so that I have record of that it was submitted. If you do not have the form on the email, you will be contacted later for it. If they had an IBIS ID, you notify me and I create the form. And in the process of this, if they had Illinois WorkNet access, Illinois WorkNet needs to be contacted with the user's name and email address so they can be also deactivated. And if they had EBS access, IEBS, through Illinois WorkNet, then we also need to make sure that Illinois WorkNet is notified and you CC me so that we can make sure that the WorkNet, the EBS access is gone. So if they no longer need EBS, but they still need WorkNet, make sure you clarify that in the email. You can do one email to all of the necessary recipients to deactivate everything at once. Just make sure the body of the email includes the user email address for Illinois WorkNet. So a summary, an example of a local system administrator deactivating all system accounts in one email to all necessary recipients. So in the necessary recipients, they have everybody selected. Body of the email says, please remove user John Doe from IBIS, IES, and Illinois WorkNet. His email was johndoe@weoaworks.org. He has already been deactivated in IWDS. Thanks, LWIA LSA. That's how simple you can do it in one shot. Now, possible system misuse, and this is applied to any of the systems, whether it's IWDS, IWDS LWIA 90, IBIS, IES, IEBS, or Illinois WorkNet. If you suspect that you have an LWIS employee or subcontractor who's misusing their access, contact the IWDS system administrators, Jim Potts and Chris Tylen at DCEO, immediately. Misuse includes accessing the systems for outside employment purposes, things that are non-WIO related, using the systems for personal gain, using the system to look up information on family members, coworkers, or celebrities. And yes, we have had all of those happen. Just in the 14 years that I've been with working with IWDS and DCEO, I have been involved in at least 7 system misuse situations with LWIA employees or subcontractors. And a couple of them were pretty serious. They were looking up all of their coworkers and their coworkers' spouses' information on IBIS for how much money they made. That was one of them. I had another one where somebody was looking up all the different celebrities they could think of: baseball players, basketball players, Oprah Winfrey. Had another one where someone was looking up their family members. Had another one where someone was looking up their spouse in a divorce situation. These are serious. So don't take any chances. If you have any suspicions at all, contact the CEO immediately. And with that, these are the contact information for the various things. The IWDS system administrator is Jim Potts, Chris Tylen. IBIS coordinator is me, Chris Tylen. If you have anything involving the WEOL performance measure staff, that's Mark Burgess, Paula Berry, and Ray. And then the FDA liaison for IES access, as well as the shared data agreement forms, is Carrie Compardo. Are there any questions about user ID? All right. Well, if there are any questions after this is the recording is finished, email me. I'll answer them as quickly as I can. And Kirsten is going to send out both PowerPoints as well as some of the related PDFs that we talked about during the course of the 2 training webinars to you guys at the completion of this this training. And the webinar will be posted on Illinois WorkNet, and we will send out the URLs so that if you have someone who wasn't able to attend today, they can watch it and go through and get the same information. Or if you feel that you need to go back and go over a particular section, you're more than welcome to do that. If you find something you're not completely 100% on, please contact me. I will do my best to walk you through it. And if it turns out that I have something that's confusing, conflicting, or incorrect on one of my slides, I appreciate the feedback so that I can fix it. This is something where normally we do this about every 6 months, but it's been a year since the last time we did it, so I know that I found several mistakes on the slides when I was recreating them and updating them in December, and I really hope that I caught all of them. But according to my notes today, I've got a few of them I need to update before the next time we do the next time. So that said, everyone enjoy the rest of their Monday. And for those of you that are going to do relationships, entities, locations, and contacts, I will see you tomorrow afternoon. And with that, Kirsten, I'm going to look at this chat.
Okay.
We are done.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.